In a society where life expectancy hovered around 35 years, an Israelite woman could spend more than half of her existence pregnant, breastfeeding, or caring for small children. And yet, she was the one who produced the bread, made the clothing, managed the household economy, and in many cases negotiated at the market. History recorded kings and prophets, but it was the women who kept Israel standing. And to understand the real weight of that statement, you need to forget everything you imagine about the past. There was no electricity, no running water, no form of automation whatsoever. Every grain of wheat that fed a family first passed through a woman's hands. Every strand of wool that became clothing was spun by hand, in a process that could take weeks to produce enough fabric for a single tunic. Every jar of water that supplied the household was carried on the head or shoulders, often over distances of 500 meters to a kilometer, several times a day. This was the foundation of female existence in Israel, and the day began before sunrise. The first sound that echoed inside an Israelite home around 4 in the morning was not the crowing of a rooster. It was the rhythmic friction of the grinding stone. 2 circular stones, one on top of the other, with a hole in the center through which the grain was poured. The woman would kneel before the handmill and turn the upper stone with repetitive, constant movements for 30 to 60 minutes straight, until the wheat was ground into flour fine enough for making bread. The physical effort required was so intense that archaeological excavations at Israelite sites have revealed bone deformities in the joints of the knees, wrists, and spine of female skeletons, permanent marks left by decades of daily grinding. And it was no small amount of flour. An average family in Israel had between 5 and 7 children, adding husband, wife, children, and in many cases, in-laws or extended relatives. A household could shelter 8 to 12 people. To feed this group, the woman needed to produce between 3 and 5 kilograms of bread per day. This meant manually grinding a proportional amount of grain every morning, without fail, without pause, without exception. If she did not grind, no one ate. The bread was baked in a clay oven called a tabun, a conical structure about 60 centimeters tall, fueled by dried animal dung or twigs. The woman shaped the dough into thin discs and pressed them onto the heated inner walls of the oven, removing each loaf with her bare hands when the dough was baked. Burns were frequent. Scars on the forearms and hands were part of the routine. And the entire process, from grinding to finished bread, needed to be completed before the rest of the household woke up, because the day of heavy labor had not even begun yet. After the bread came the water. In villages and hamlets, the nearest water source could be hundreds of meters from the house. In mountainous regions like Judah, the distance could be even greater. The woman carried a ceramic jar with a capacity of 15 to 20 liters on her head or resting on her hip, walking along dirt paths, climbing and descending slopes up to 2 or 3 times each morning. The total weight she transported in a single trip was equivalent to carrying a 2-year-old child in her arms, except balanced on her head. And the daily need of a family of 10 was around 60 to 80 liters. Do the math on the number of trips. The scene described in the book of Genesis, chapter 24, when Rebekah offers water to the camels of Abraham's servant, takes on a completely different dimension when you understand that a thirsty camel drinks between 100 and 150 liters of water at once. If there were 10 camels, Rebekah volunteered to draw and carry something close to 1,000 liters of water manually from a well. The biblical text records this gesture as proof of character, but it also reveals, unintentionally, the level of physical endurance these women possessed. With the bread baked and the water secured, the next task was textile production. And here the scale of labor becomes almost incomprehensible by today's standards. Every piece of clothing worn by every member of the family was produced inside the home, from scratch, by the woman. The process began with the shearing of sheep or the harvesting of flax. The raw wool had to be washed, carded, spun, and then woven on a vertical wooden loom that remained permanently set up inside the house or in the courtyard. Producing enough fabric for a simple tunic took between 30 and 40 hours of manual labor at the loom. One tunic. Just one. For a family of 8 people who needed clothing for the cold, for the heat, and to replace worn-out garments, the woman spent literally hundreds of hours per year just spinning and weaving. Proverbs 31, one of the most detailed texts about the female routine in Israel, describes the virtuous woman as someone who seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. The text says, she stretches out her hands to the spindle and her fingers grasp the distaff. The Hebrew word used for spindle, kishor, and for distaff, pelek, point to specific manual spinning instruments that archaeology has confirmed were omnipresent in Israelite households. Excavations at Tel Arad, Beersheba, and Lachish have found hundreds of loom weights and spinning whorls in domestic layers, indicating that textile production was as central to female life as food production. But the routine was not limited to feeding and clothing. The Israelite woman was, in practice, the financial administrator of the household. Proverbs 31, verses 16 and 18, describe a woman who evaluates a property, buys a field with the fruit of her labor, and plants a vineyard with her own hands. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. This is not abstract poetry. It is functional description. In many Israelite communities, especially in rural villages, the woman was the one who negotiated the surplus of domestic production at the local market: olive oil, fabric, pottery, prepared foods. She set prices, traded goods, and ensured that the household had sufficient reserves to survive the months of scarcity between harvests. The management of domestic inventory was an engineering of survival. Without refrigeration, without preservatives, and without any form of industrial storage, the woman needed to master food preservation techniques that required precise knowledge of proportions and timing. Olives were cured in brine with specific concentrations of salt. Figs and grapes were sun-dried in processes that took 5 to 7 days and required constant vigilance against insects and moisture. Grains were stored in underground silos lined with lime to prevent the proliferation of fungi. An error in the process meant spoiled food, and spoiled food in a subsistence economy meant hunger. Now add all of this together and place it on the shoulders of a woman who, in most cases, was pregnant or breastfeeding. The birth rate in ancient Israel was extremely high, estimated at between 6 and 8 pregnancies per woman over a lifetime. Although infant mortality meant that only 3 to 5 children survived to adulthood, the woman went through each pregnancy without medical care, without painkillers, without any of the basic conditions that today are considered the minimum for a safe pregnancy. Childbirth was attended by community midwives, carried out at home, usually in a kneeling or squatting position over birthing stones. As referenced in the book of Exodus, chapter 1, verse 16, maternal mortality was devastating. Estimates based on studies of ancient populations from the Eastern Mediterranean suggest that between 1 in 10 and 1 in 20 women died from complications of childbirth over the course of their reproductive lives. And even in the days following delivery, rest was limited. The household did not stop. The other children needed to be fed. The animals needed to be tended. The oven needed to be lit. Israelite culture recognized a period of ritual impurity after childbirth: 40 days for a boy and 80 days for a girl, according to Leviticus 12. But this did not mean physical rest. It meant restricted access to the sanctuary. The domestic routine continued. Beyond everything that happened inside the house, the Israelite woman was also responsible for a significant portion of agricultural labor. During the barley and wheat harvests between April and June, the entire family was mobilized, and the women worked side by side in the fields, reaping, gathering sheaves, and separating grain. The Book of Ruth portrays exactly this reality. A widowed, foreign woman working from morning until night in the barley fields, gleaning ears of grain left behind by the reapers. The text of Ruth 2, verse 7, records that she worked from the morning without stopping, with only a brief rest. This was not the exception. It was the norm. The olive harvest between September and November was another period of intense labor. The women participated in the manual collection of the fruit and in many cases operated the domestic olive presses, stone presses where the olives were crushed to extract the oil. Olive oil was the most valuable product of the Israelite domestic economy. It served as food, fuel for lamps, a base for medicinal ointments, and a medium of exchange in local trade. An average family produced between 50 and 150 liters of olive oil per season, and the woman supervised every stage of the process. But the dimension of female life in Israel that records most neglect is the spiritual and educational dimension. The Israelite woman was the first teacher of her children. Before any boy was taken to the elder or the Levite for formal instruction, it was the mother who taught the foundations of faith, the stories of the patriarchs, the basic commandments and family traditions. Deuteronomy 6, verses 6 and 7 commands that the words of God be taught diligently to the children, speaking of them while sitting at home, walking along the road, lying down and rising up. In daily practice, the person who spent the most time with young children was the mother. It was she who told the stories of Abraham, of Joseph, of the Exodus from Egypt. It was she who taught the first prayers and explained the meaning of the Sabbath. The female spiritual role went beyond the education of children. Women participated in the national religious festivals. 1 Samuel 1 describes Hannah going up to the tabernacle at Shiloh with her husband year after year to worship and offer sacrifices. The text shows Hannah praying with such intensity that the priest Eli thought she was drunk. Hannah's prayer, recorded in 1 Samuel 2, is one of the most theologically sophisticated canticles in all of Hebrew scripture, and it came from the mouth of a woman. Deborah, described in Judges 4 and 5, held the position of judge over all Israel. The text is direct. She was judging Israel at that time, and the Israelites went up to her to obtain judgment. She sat under a palm tree between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim and exercised judicial and military authority over the entire nation. It was Deborah who summoned Barak for the battle against Sisera and the Canaanite army. And when Barak hesitated, saying he would only go if she went with him, Deborah went. The victory song recorded in Judges 5 is attributed to her and is considered one of the oldest poetic texts in the entire Bible. But Deborah was the exception. The rule was different. The majority of women in Israel lived within a legal system that placed them under male authority from birth until death, first the fathers, then the husbands. A woman could not inherit property if there were male children in the family, according to Numbers 27. A vow made by a woman could be annulled by her husband or father, according to Numbers 30. Divorce was an exclusively male right. The husband would deliver a certificate of divorce to his wife and send her away, according to Deuteronomy 24, verse 1. A divorced or widowed woman without adult male children found herself in one of the most vulnerable social positions possible. This is why Israelite legislation repeatedly insisted on the protection of widows and orphans. Deuteronomy 10, verse 18, declares that God executes justice for the orphan and the widow. Deuteronomy 24, verses 19 through 21, establishes that part of the harvest should be left in the field, specifically for widows, foreigners, and orphans. The very existence of these laws reveals the scale of the problem. If it was necessary to legislate repeatedly to protect these women, it was because they were constantly at risk. The institution of levirate marriage, described in Deuteronomy 25, was another protective mechanism. If a man died without children, his brother was to marry the widow to ensure offspring and preserve the family inheritance. The case of Tamar, in Genesis 38, shows how far a woman could go when this system failed. Judah did not fulfill the levirate obligation toward Tamar, and she, to secure her rights and her survival, took drastic measures that the biblical text itself recognizes as more righteous than Judah's neglect. What these accounts reveal, when viewed together, is an existence marked by a brutal contradiction. On one side, the woman was legally subordinate, socially limited, and formally excluded from most spaces of public power. On the other, she was the one who sustained the entire infrastructure of community life: the food, the clothing, the household economy, the education of children, the preservation of faith, and the biological continuity of the people. Without female labor, no Israelite village would survive a week. And this contradiction appears clearly in the way the biblical texts treat female figures. When the narrative needs courage, Rahab appears, hiding spies in Jericho. When it needs political wisdom, Abigail appears, preventing David from committing a massacre. When it needs faithfulness beyond duty, Ruth appears, refusing to abandon her mother-in-law. When it needs real influence over the destiny of a nation, Esther appears, risking her own life before the king of Persia. The routine of these women did not end with sunset. Proverbs 31 verse 18 says that her lamp does not go out at night. This is not a metaphor for spiritual diligence. It is a literal description. After the family fell asleep, the woman continued working, spinning, sewing, preparing food for the next day, checking supplies, caring for sick children. The olive oil lamps that illuminated these nights of labor had an autonomy of 4 to 6 hours and needed to be manually refilled. Total darkness inside a stone house without large windows was the everyday setting for these women who kept the world running while everyone else slept. The health of these women reflected the brutality of their routine. In addition to the joint deformities caused by daily grinding, examinations of female skeletal remains from the Iron Age, corresponding to the era of the kings of Israel, reveal a high incidence of iron deficiency anemia, severe dental wear caused by the presence of stone particles in manually ground flour, and signs of early-onset osteoporosis related to multiple pregnancies and long periods of breastfeeding on a calcium-poor diet. Female life expectancy was, on average, 2 to 5 years shorter than male life expectancy, reversing the pattern observed in modern populations. They lived less and they worked more. On feast days, however, life took on a different rhythm. Women played an active role in community celebrations. Exodus 15 verse 20 describes Miriam, the sister of Moses, taking a tambourine and leading all the women in dance and song after the crossing of the Red Sea. Judges 11 verse 34 describes Jephthah's daughter going out to meet her father with tambourines and dancing. 1 Samuel 18 verse 6 records women from the cities of Israel coming out to greet Saul and David with songs, dancing, tambourines, and 3-stringed instruments. Female music and dance were not decorative accompaniments. They were a legitimate and recognized expression of communal and spiritual celebration. Women's clothing also had a clear social function. The basic tunic was similar to the male version, a long garment of wool or linen that reached from the shoulders to the ankles. Over it, a heavier mantle served as protection against the cold, and in many cases as a blanket at night. The veil was worn in certain social contexts, especially in wedding rituals and formal situations, but the practice varied by region and period. Genesis 24, verse 65, describes Rebekah covering herself with a veil upon first sighting Isaac. Song of Songs 3, verse 2, describes the bride moving through the city. The wearing of jewelry, earrings, bracelets, nose rings, anklets was common and served as a store of value and a symbol of status. Isaiah 3, verses 18 through 23, lists more than 20 items of female adornment, from tiaras to perfume pouches. Marriage was the central event in the life of an Israelite woman. The typical age for a woman's marriage was between 12 and 14, shortly after the onset of puberty. The process began with an agreement between the families, in which the groom or his family paid a mohar, bride price, to the young woman's father. The standard value mentioned in Exodus 22, verse 16, was 50 shekels of silver, equivalent to approximately 2 to 3 years' wages of a day laborer. The young woman received a dowry from her own family, which remained as her financial security in case of widowhood or divorce. The wedding ceremony lasted 7 days, with feasts, music, dancing, and banquets that involved the entire community. After the marriage, the young woman went to live in the house of the husband's family, joining a multi-generational family arrangement that could include in-laws, brothers-in-law, and their respective families. Adapting to this new social structure, with its internal hierarchy, its tensions, and its alliances, required of the young wife a capacity for social navigation that went far beyond the passive obedience that stereotypes suggest. Within this structure, some women achieved positions of notable influence. The Shunammite woman, described in 2 Kings 4, was independent enough to decide to build an extra room in her house for the prophet Elisha, mobilize resources for it, and negotiate directly with the prophet in times of crisis. The wise woman of Abel Beth-Maachah in 2 Samuel 20 negotiated directly with Joab, commander of David's army, and saved an entire city from destruction. Huldah, the prophetess, described in 2 Kings 22, was consulted by King Josiah himself when the Book of the Law was found in the temple, and there were male priests and prophets available at the time. These examples do not negate the structural limitations, but they reveal that the system, despite being restrictive, had cracks through which women of initiative, intelligence, and courage managed to exercise real power. The difference between the legal rule and the lived reality was, in many cases, significant. Aging brought an important change in female status. An older woman, especially if she was the mother of successful adult sons, gained respect and authority within the clan. The fifth commandment, honor your father and your mother, was taken with social and legal seriousness. Proverbs 1 verse 8 places the mother's instruction on the same level as the father's instruction. Proverbs 23 verse 22 commands that no one despise their mother when she grows old. The elderly matriarch became a counselor, a mediator of family conflicts, and a guardian of oral tradition, the woman who kept alive the collective memory of the family and the clan. 3,000 years separate those women from the present world, but the distance is shorter than it seems. The pressure to sustain a household with limited resources, the need to balance multiple roles at the same time, the work that no one recognizes but that if it stops, everything collapses. None of this remained in the past. What changed were the tools. The spindle became a machine. The clay oven became a stove. The cistern became a faucet. But the emotional, logistical, and physical engineering demanded of those who carry the invisible weight of a family remains strangely familiar. The history of Israel was not written only by those who wielded swords or uttered oracles. It was written, line by line, by those who woke before everyone and slept after everyone. And that history continues to be written today.